Nick and I have been talking about this FTX stuff that's been going on and all the news that surrounds it and the arrest of the founder. And nobody better to break this all down than Emily Flitter. She's a New York Times finance reporter. She joins us here on the podcast. Emily, Mike Leon, thank you so much for hopping on the pod with me.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
Emily, truly nobody better than you. I've been reading a lot of your articles and a lot of the coverage that the New York Times has been doing about, the founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, getting arrested in the Bahamas. And I think for our audience, especially for me and Nick, because neither of us invest in cryptocurrency or in FTX or anything like that, can you give a 30,000-foot view of what has played out over the last couple of weeks with the company going bankrupt and then their founder ultimately being arrested?
Sure. So FTX was a cryptocurrency exchange based in the Bahamas that had a reputation that was almost larger than, well, I would say arguably larger than it deserved. It was a small exchange, but its founder had a huge public presence. His name is Sam Bankman-Fried. He ran a sort of an empire of cryptocurrency trading through a hedge fund that he had started called Alameda Research. And then he started this cryptocurrency exchange that the public could access after he had already been doing Alameda for a couple of years. So the reason that he had this really big public profile is that he presented himself as a multi-billionaire who was dedicated to amassing as much wealth as he could just to give it away. And he basically built from that concept an entire persona of being the responsible crypto billionaire, the crypto billionaire who wanted to reach out and bring the industry into legitimacy by working with regulators and working with US lawmakers to develop a legal framework for regulating crypto. That turns out was all a fraud. And nobody really kind of pointed a finger at him. There were actually, if you look back, there were kind of discussions about how such and such an aspect of his business didn't make sense, but no one called him out for being a fraud. What happened was somehow the news outlet CoinDesk, which focuses on covering crypto, got hold of an internal piece of FTX's balance sheet and published it. And for the first time, the world saw that this place was a mess. It owed billions of dollars to other lenders and to customers and just didn't have the money. That started the collapse. That article came out right at the beginning of November. And over the next week, the company fell apart. Sam Bankman-Fried went to his rivals and asked for a bailout. At one point, the owner of the biggest exchange, Changpeng Zhao, who goes by CZ, actually we would say his name Zhao Changpeng, he was going to buy the pieces of FTX at one point, their assets, and then he and his team looked closely at the books, and they realized that it was just an absolute mess, and the hole in the balance sheet was too big, and they walked away. Sam Bankman-Fried couldn't raise the money, and it collapsed. And immediately, authorities got access to the books, and they started looking, and they realized that he had been really just outright lying about what was happening inside his company. So what we saw yesterday in the charges was that he was charged with fraud. It's really simple. He was collecting money from customers who thought they were sending their money to FTX to trade on the platform. Their money was going into bank accounts that were controlled by the hedge fund Alameda. And Alameda was basically just taking as much of customer money as it wanted to, as Sam Bankman-Fried wanted to give it, and trading with it, paying back lenders. That almost had a Ponzi element to it. He was collecting new money from customers and giving it back to older financial interlocutors. So that's what happened in a nutshell. And the collapse of FTX has really destabilized the entire industry. And everyone's kind of waiting to see what's going to happen next.
Well, I'm glad you just gave a fantastic summation. Again, as somebody who is not well versed in it, I really learned a lot there. And as you started talking, I thought about in the sports world, a team that's near and dear to my heart, the New York Islanders, once upon a time had a famous owner that there's a 30 for 30 documentary about, Texas businessman John Spano, who had maybe a few $1,000s, but somehow found a way to get investors to invest in him and ultimately buy a sports franchise. And then it was found out that he had no money, bankruptcy courts, this and that. And so I'm starting to think about, kind of the parallels there. So I want to ask you, how did this guy convince so many people to invest in FTX?
Well, first of all, I am so excited that you brought up John Spano. That is one of my favorite fraud stories because John Spano almost succeeded in buying the Islanders. He showed up out of nowhere. He acted like a billionaire and he told people he was a billionaire, and everybody just took him at his word. And then he started to try to like put these elements of a deal together that would have involved a Bank of America loan and a Comcast sponsorship, and all of those things together almost actually worked, which was the amazing thing. And I think the parallel here is Sam felt, at least based on his public statements, and he made so many public statements after FTX collapsed. He really felt like if he could just have one more bailout, he would somehow manage to stick all of these pieces back together. What's different though, is how much money he was actually able to collect from people, um, and then and lose. I mean, he spent it on apartments and personal expenses. FTX employees were taking out loans from the company using customer money. The loans were poorly documented, if they were documented at all. This is all according to what we found out yesterday. And so in that regard, for anybody who knows the Spano story, he did kind of live large at like one club in Garden City, New York, but he didn't like spend billions of dollars of people's money. Um, the the other similarity though between those two cases is just how trusting reporters were of these two figures. John Spano talked a good game, and no one said, hey, wait a minute, like, we haven't seen proof that this guy has any money. I think it's really hard. I mean, I'm speaking as a reporter who has covered fraud for more than a decade. Um, Even if you, I mean, actually, let me back up. I don't think that we have a good excuse. I think we all should have been more skeptical. But Sam did a lot of work. He hired the most sophisticated political PR firm in Washington to spam people with all this news about how FTX was helping, achieve financial inclusion through crypto and helping unbanked people get access to the financial system. Actually, I just wrote a book about the about racism in the financial system called The White Wall, and I can tell you crypto is not the answer. And when I looked into that aspect of it, which is not in the book, but when FTX collapsed, I found that the claims that FTX was making around this were particularly empty. But that's all to say, he talked a big game. He doesn't seem to even be able to admit to himself in public that he was lying right from the start. And I think he dazzled people.
You've been covering a little bit of obviously his arrest that just happened in the Bahamas. What do you foresee to happen in this case? Because you were talking about it before about how he basically defrauded millions. There was people within the company taking out loans. Like, where do we expect all of this to net out in the legal realm?
Well, he's facing criminal charges. He's facing civil cases brought by two regulators, the SEC and the CFTC. Those agencies are accusing him of fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, manipulating the prices of different digital currencies. He's facing a really serious bunch of legal cases. He's been denied bail because he was viewed as a flight risk. And he's going to have a hard time, I think, finding leniency, because he's really at the center of all of this conduct. And we also believe, or I would say, let me step back. There's speculation and evidence out there that his former co-founders and top lieutenants have been cooperating with authorities. The authorities have not admitted to that. So I can't say that for certain, but the way these cases get built is that you have an insider who explains to somebody how everything works. And I don't see why that the authorities wouldn't have been able to convince somebody to say, hey, you sit down and tell us what you know, and we're going to make sure that our focus is really on the main guy. And the main guy is Sam.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm learning so much here because again, I have been following more of the arrest and the subsequent bankruptcy stuff and things like that. And you wrote something in the New York Times article that recently came out that he did not expect this arrest. His parents had flown down to visit him in the Bahamas, and I was sitting there going, he didn't expect to get arrested after defrauding people of millions of dollars. Like, how could that be? But I want to ask you because you've been covering people in the financial sector for so long. How different is covering the folks behind crypto than it is covering investors in traditional markets?
It's actually not that different. I just like we, agreed that this case sounds kind of like John Spano. I think when you get down to it, we're talking about the same kinds of behaviors that we see from people who are trying to get money from other people in a lot of different ways through the financial industry. I mean, we have Ponzi schemers, we have oil and gas wildcatters who collect money from people to drill a hole in the ground, and then they get to keep the money because, they paid themselves some kind of management fee. There are all kinds of scammers out there. And Sam was a scammer, according to what we've learned from the authorities.
Boy, it's a shame as some of the people that invested in this and maybe lost money in this and what will happen and play out in the legal realm. I want to give you some space. Actually, I'm so glad that you mentioned your book that's available now wherever books are sold. It's called The White Wall: How Big Finance Bankrupts Black America. Excuse me. I saw the book and I was very interested. Ordered it last night on Amazon, so you got an order coming down here to Miami, where I live. You're welcome. And but I'm very interested to read about it, and I would love to get for our audience here. We've had a lot of authors, a lot that are over my shoulder here for people watching on YouTube that have been on this program. So tell the audience a little bit about your book.
My book looks at present day racism in the financial industry. There are a lot of people and companies out there who want to say, yes, things were bad in the past, but we fixed them. That's not right. In the modern day financial system, Black Americans still face disadvantages from the moment they walk into a bank, the moment they file an insurance claim, which I actually just wrote about again today, and the moment they try to get a job in the financial industry. There are these extra barriers. And so my book actually walks through the different kind of sectors of the financial industry. We have wealth management, we have retail banking, we have Wall Street, high finance, we have insurance, the role that AI plays in all of these things. I kind of examine each segment. And then the last section of the book is, what can we do about this? And I argue that we need to actually have big companies support reparations and lobby for reparations from the federal government. We can't get any farther than we are getting right now with achieving economic equality in this country if big companies don't acknowledge the harms that were done in the past and that are still being done, and explain their roles in those harms to their own employees and to their customers. We have to get everybody on board. And if you look at like these huge companies like JP Morgan and Amazon, for instance, JP Morgan and Amazon tried to team up to fix the healthcare system. This was a couple of years ago. And they didn't end up fixing the healthcare system, but they got a ton of press coverage. So if these huge companies would come out and say, you know what, we have been discriminating against people in all of these ways, and so has every other part of the U.S. economic system. And we need to stop, and we need to make reparations. That's what I think would really bring about a big change. So that's what I argue in the final section of the book.
Well, it's I can't wait to read it, and you can go order it wherever books are sold. Like I mentioned, it's called The White Wall: How Big Finance Bankrupts Black America. You can see it there for those of you watching on YouTube. Shameless plug there for Emily, but good job by her in writing about something. Again, as somebody who has my father's black, my mom's Puerto Rican, and some of this stuff has kind of crossed over into my world. So I am very much looking forward to reading the book. You can check out all of Emily's work over at NewYorkTimes.com or download the New York Times app. She does fantastic work. She's a finance reporter over there. You have educated me and our audience, and I can't thank you enough for that, Emily. Continued success to you, and please stay safe.
Thank you, Mike. And as a Rangers fan, I can't say go Islanders, but I salute you and wish your team all the best.
Well, I appreciate that, and I do not wish the Rangers all the best, but I do appreciate that sentiment. Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do them a favor. So hit subscribe.